The Old Kingdom of Egypt reveals a world where stone became the language of power, and underground corridors conceal the secret knowledge of the priesthood. The Great Pyramids, sacred roads, hidden archives, and unexplored mines created an architecture that combined science, ritual, and cosmic symbolism. By exploring its forgotten levels, we come closer to understanding the ancient logic that connected earth and sky. Hidden chambers of the Djoser Pyramid. The Pyramid of Djoser, standing in Saqqara as the first stone skyscraper of the ancient world, has long been considered a symbol of the beginnings of monumental architecture in Egypt. However, its true secret lies not in its majestic steps, but in its deep levels, extending hundreds of meters underground. Here lies a network of rooms, passages, and ritual halls, constructed with a complexity uncharacteristic of the early period of civilization. These chambers, many of which remain inaccessible even today, form an enigmatic system whose purpose remains unclear. Archaeologists have discovered over 5 kilometers of tunnels carved into the rock beneath the pyramid. But the most astonishing thing is that the structure of these tunnels is too complex to serve a practical burial function. They twist, split, and reconnect, forming a unique labyrinth. Some sections are so narrow that a person can barely pass through, while others open into spacious chambers with perfectly smooth walls. Each chamber seems to have been created for a specific ritual or for the storage of special objects, traces of which are now lost. In one of the rooms, blue faience tiles were discovered, a rare example of decorative design so deep underground. These tiles create the impression that the walls reflect heavenly light, transporting the spectator to a space between heaven and earth. Perhaps this room reflected the idea of royal rebirth, a transition to the world of the gods. But why is it buried so deeply, and why is it so carefully concealed? This question remains unanswered. Particularly intriguing is the central vertical shaft, over 28 meters deep, leading to the burial chamber. The shaft was sealed with massive granite plugs, each weighing several tons. However, even beneath them, researchers discovered traces of attempted penetration dating back to ancient times. Most intriguingly, adjacent to the shaft are side chambers, inaccessible by normal means. They can only be seen through small viewing holes, likely created during 20th century restorations. Inside, the chamber is completely empty, but the walls are covered with strange horizontal lines, as if someone had made markings and then erased them. Some underground chambers resemble miniature halls with columns carved directly into the stone. These columns are not load-bearing, they are decorative but have an unusual shape, as if echoing the most ancient types of buildings made of plant materials. Why did the architects copy the forms of the original dwellings in these underground ritual spaces? Perhaps it was an attempt to connect the past and the future, to give the king the opportunity to retrace the path of his ancestors before ascending to the realm of the gods. Another mystery concerns a corridor leading to the so-called series, narrow rooms arranged in a chain. No objects have been found within them, but each room has precise dimensions and is oriented with almost mathematical precision. Some researchers believe these series were used to store ritual vessels or sacred tablets, but there is no direct evidence. Another theory is that these rooms were part of a ritual where priests imparted spells and knowledge to the pharaoh, necessary for the afterlife. There is also a more mysterious observation. Strange acoustics have been noted in several corridors. A whisper spoken at one end reverberates far ahead, as if the sound were choosing its own path. Acoustic anomalies are found in other Egyptian monuments, but they are particularly pronounced in the Pyramid of Djoser. Perhaps the ancient masters used the properties of sound as part of ritual practices, enhancing the effect of divine presence. Many chambers remain incompletely explored. Some are blocked by rubble, others are too unstable to enter. It is hypothesized that even more ancient structures, built before Djoser and later used as foundations, may lie deeper. Ground-penetrating radar surveys sometimes reveal voids that cannot yet be verified. These voids may be natural faults, but they may also be hidden chambers whose purpose will only become clear to future generations of researchers. The Pyramid of Djoser is more than just Egypt's first monument. It is a multi-level world encompassing an architectural experiment, a ritual labyrinth, and perhaps the oldest cosmological model. Its hidden chambers remain a source of mystery, and even the most modern technology cannot reveal all the secrets hidden beneath its majestic steps. Architectural innovations of Snefru. Pharaoh Snefru, who founded the Fourth Dynasty, changed the face of Egypt like no one before him. His name is associated with three great architectural experiments: the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and the Northern Pyramid at Meidum. Each represents a unique stage in the search for the ideal form, transforming stone into a symbol of the rising sun. But behind the superficial grandeur lies an even deeper layer: mystical geometry and engineering solutions centuries ahead of their time. Sneferu's first project was the Pyramid at Meidum, a mysterious structure that still sparks controversy. Its collapse in ancient times was a dramatic lesson, but it was precisely this failure that allowed architects to recognize the mistakes of earlier construction. However, some researchers believe the collapse was no accident and that the pyramid's internal structure was designed for specific ritual practices. The smooth interior walls, narrow corridors, and resonant chambers resemble a temple complex more than a typical tomb. Meidum may have been an experiment in sacred acoustics. The next step was the famous Bent Pyramid at Dashur, the only pyramid in Egypt with two different tilt angles. Scientists attribute this to an engineering overhaul related to the risk of collapse. However, mystical tradition sees the change in tilt as a transition between two states, earthly and heavenly. The pyramid's upper portion faces almost directly toward the winter solstice. Perhaps the architects intended to create a structure that would connect the paths of light with the inner ritual chambers. Inside the Bent Pyramid are two chambers with sloping ceilings forming a kind of acoustic dome. When sound reflects in them, it is altered, acquiring a soft vibrational quality. Researchers have discovered that certain frequencies create standing waves capable of producing a sensation of pressure on the body. This may indicate ritual trance practices used in funeral rites. Perhaps Sneferu was creating not just a tomb, but an instrument of communication between worlds. The third great experiment was the Red Pyramid, the first completely successful classical pyramid with perfectly smooth faces. It combines strict geometry and mathematical precision. Its corners are aligned with the cardinal directions with an accuracy of less than 1/4 of a degree, an achievement that commands the respect of even modern engineers. The stone blocks are so precisely fitted that it is impossible to insert a knife blade between them. But the most important feature is the internal system of corridors and chambers built with astonishing perfectionism. The central burial chamber of the Red Pyramid has a unique vault formed by ledges converging upward. This design distributes the weight of the stone so that pressure on the lower levels is almost eliminated. But beyond its engineering function, the vault also has unusual acoustics. When a person stands in the center of the chamber and utters a sound, their voice takes on a double echo, as if two forces were responding simultaneously. This has led to the hypothesis that the chamber was intended for ritual speeches addressed to the gods of light and darkness. The orientation of Sneferu's pyramids is also interesting. The Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid, along with Meidum, form a distinctive triangle inscribed in the desert landscape. Some astronomers believe their arrangement reflects the pattern of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, but in an early unformed form. If so, Sneferu was the first to attempt to map the sky onto the ground, an idea that would be further developed under Khufu and Khafre. Archaeological research near the pyramids of Sneferu revealed the existence of workers' cities, roads, and docks forming a complex infrastructure. However, among these finds are also stranger things: stone platforms with no apparent function, circles carved into the ground, narrow canals leading to nowhere. These may have been observation points, ritual sites, or areas associated with astronomical calculations. Their purpose remains a mystery. Sneferu's innovations extend beyond construction. He set a precedent in which architecture becomes a form of magic. Each pyramid was not simply built, but tuned to cosmic cycles. The interior corridors served as channels for the movement of light and air, while the outer faces reflected solar energy. This was an attempt to create a structure that would connect the world of the living and the world of the gods into a single flow. Thus, Sneferu became not only an architectural reformer, but also the creator of a new model of sacred space. He was the creator of an era of great experimentation, a time when every stone carried a dual nature, engineering thought and mystical purpose. Unexplored shafts of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, standing majestically on the Giza Plateau, has long astonished researchers with its precision, scale, and architectural logic. But its most enigmatic elements are hidden not on the surface, but within, in narrow shafts extending deep into the stone. These shafts, known as ventilation channels, are too small for human passage, but are so precisely aligned with the stars that their role in the funerary complex may be far more complex than previously thought. The first of these shafts is located in the Queen's Chamber. It slopes upward, ending at a stone slab known as the Gantenbrink Door. At the beginning of the 21st century, a small robot penetrated the shaft and photographed two copper protrusions, possibly decorative elements or handles of a ritual mechanism. However, the main discovery came later. Behind the first slab was a second, even thinner one. This suggests a multi-stage locking system or a ritual partitioning of the space, the purpose of which was to conceal something important from the uninitiated. What lies behind the second block? No one knows. The robot was unable to proceed further due to technical limitations, and further exploration was halted. There is a theory that behind the slabs there may be a small chamber intended for storing sacred objects, a Ka statue, sacred textiles, and symbolic vessels. However, the orientation of the shaft suggests a more cosmic purpose. It points toward the star Sirius, the symbol of the goddess Isis, and a key element of the Egyptian calendar. The second shaft of the Queen's Chamber is aligned with the star Kochab, which in ancient times served as the polar star. This precision suggests that the shafts served not as ventilation holes, but as communication channels between the tomb and the heavens. They may have symbolized the path the pharaoh's soul would take to reach the stars. This is consistent with ancient texts that refer to the king as the one who goes north to the eternal lights. The shafts of the king's chamber are even more mysterious. The southern shaft is aligned with Orion's belt, a constellation associated with the god Osiris. The northern shaft points to Thuban, a star that was at the center of the celestial rotation around 2500 BCE. This carefully calibrated orientation system suggests that the pyramid's architects were creating an engineering and religious complex, connecting earth and heaven through stone. What surprises researchers most? The geometric precision of the shafts. They are carved with minimal deviations, despite being up to 60 meters long, and the impossibility of visually monitoring their direction. This means that ancient craftsmen possessed measurement techniques that are difficult to reproduce today without laser instruments. It has been suggested that the shafts were constructed using taut cords reflecting sunlight, but this does not explain their precise orientation to individual stars. Some sections of the shafts feature sharp turns or widenings. These architectural anomalies may be related to the shaft's passage through structural zones of the pyramid, but other hypotheses exist. A mystical interpretation suggests that the turns symbolize stages of the soul's transition or changes in state of consciousness. Ancient texts often speak of turnings in the path and gates of light encountered along the king's journey to the afterlife. Perhaps the architects took these ideas literally. The smoothness of the walls inside the shafts is particularly striking. In some areas, the surface is so polished that it appears to have been processed with modern abrasives. This raises debate. Were rare minerals used, or were the surfaces coated with a thin layer of gypsum or lime? Or did the shafts serve a ritual function requiring a perfectly clean surface? An interesting detail is the absence of soot traces inside the shafts and adjacent corridors. This means that the ancient craftsmen worked without torches or oil lamps. How did they illuminate narrow tunnels tens of meters long? The most common theory suggests light reflectors and mirrors, but there is no direct evidence for this. It's possible they used highly reflective minerals or even chemical light sources, now lost to time. There is also a hypothesis about a sealed chamber, a mysterious space connected to the shafts but inaccessible to modern researchers. Ground-penetrating radar sometimes reveals voids behind the pyramid's inner blocks. Perhaps the shafts weren't intended for physical access, but were part of a ritual mechanism activated by light. On certain days of the year, sunlight could pass through the shafts, illuminating hidden drawings or symbols. This practice is well known in Egyptian architecture, for example, at the Abu Simbel Temple. The unexplored shafts of the Great Pyramid remain one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. They combine engineering genius, mystical symbolism, and cosmic orientation. Every attempt to explore them reveals new questions, and even modern robots cannot uncover all their secrets. Perhaps it is within these narrow stone channels that lies the key to understanding the worldview of the ancient Egyptians, their connection with the sky, their striving for eternity, and their conception of the king's path among the stars. The Valley of King Khufu and the Lost Boat Landing. The Valley of King Khufu, located to the east of the Great Pyramid, long remained in the shadow of the gigantic monument. But it was here that one of the most enigmatic complexes of the Old Kingdom was located, a system of boat pits, docks, and ritual structures associated with the pharaoh's path between the worlds. The Egyptians believed that the king's rebirth was impossible without passing through the waterway, a symbolic path connecting the horizon with the underworld. In the Valley of Khufu, this path was embodied in stone with astonishing precision. Initial explorations of the complex revealed that there once stood a huge pier here, capable of accommodating wooden barges up to 40 meters long. These barges were no ordinary means of transport. They were sacred vessels designed to carry the sun god Ra on his daily and nightly journeys. The pharaoh, considered Ra's son, followed the same route, and therefore the construction of the pier had not only ritual but also cosmic significance. The most astonishing feature is the orientation of the pier. Its axis points due east, toward the point of sunrise on the equinoxes. This suggests that the complex's architects used astronomical observations to align the waterway with the sun's movements. When the sun rose above the horizon, its rays illuminated the entrance to the valley, transforming it into a symbol of the rising of the god Ra. At such moments, ritual processions likely accompanied the solar barge, the pharaoh's wooden vessel, which was carried across the earth to the Great Pyramid. But the mystery that most perplexes researchers is the lost dock. Ground-penetrating radar data reveals that beneath the sand lies a structure resembling a long stone dock, extending at an angle toward the ancient Nile riverbed. This dock was likely used for loading barges, but its exact purpose remains unknown. Some believe it was part of a canal system connecting the pyramid to the river, but no traces of a permanent waterway have been found. The mystery is complicated by the discovery of traces of massive wooden structures near the dock, which could have been part of floating platforms. These platforms were possibly used to transport the giant stone blocks from which the pyramid was built. Thus, the dock had a dual function. It served as both a ritual center and a logistics hub. However, the ritual component undoubtedly dominated, as evidenced by the location of sacred pits for solar boats. The most famous of these boats is the so-called Khufu bark, found in perfect condition and almost completely restored. Its craftsmanship is astonishing. The joints are made without nails, and the hull has a special shape that allows the vessel to rise and fall on the waves. But this boat was not intended for navigation on the Nile. It was created for a heavenly journey, the king's symbolic passage to the other world. The only question is how it was used during rituals. Some Egyptologists believe the barge was part of a ritual performed in the Valley of Khufu. During the ceremony, the barge was likely moved along the pier, accompanied by chants. A platform discovered near the pier may have served as a place where priests lifted the vessel and positioned it at a specific angle to the sun. Some speculate that sunlight falling on the barge created special reflections, symbolizing the revival of the vessel. But the most enigmatic phenomenon associated with the valley is not the artifacts discovered, but the spatial geometry. Scientists have discovered that the lines of Khufu's pyramid, the pier, and the solar boats form a triangle conforming to precisely calculated proportions. These proportions are repeated in other monuments of the Old Kingdom, indicating the existence of a hidden mathematical tradition. Perhaps ancient architects used sacred geometry to create spaces in harmony with the movements of celestial bodies. There's a theory that special night rituals were held in the Khufu Valley in which moonlight played a key role. Traces of stone channels have been discovered in some parts of the complex, which could have served as reflectors or guides for light. If so, the pier was not just part of the actual landscape, but also a model of the celestial path the pharaoh was expected to follow in eternity. Perhaps rituals associated with the soul's transition to the celestial world were performed here. However, the greatest mystery remains beneath the sand. Near the pier, voids have been discovered that may conceal another boat, perhaps a unique design, different from the known solar barges. Or they could be the remains of a ritual complex designed to prepare the king's body for a journey. Ground-penetrating radar reveals structures resembling blocked corridors leading deep into the valley. However, due to the unstable soil, excavations there are impossible. If these structures truly exist, they could radically change our understanding of the royal ascension ritual. The Valley of Khufu will become more than just an auxiliary complex, but a crucial element of sacred architecture connecting the pyramid to the Nile and the sky. Perhaps it was here that the pharaoh's journey, destined to lead him to eternal renewal, began. The Valley of King Khufu remains a mystery hidden in the sands. Its boat pits, docks, and geometric structures create the impression of a carefully crafted ritual space, but much remains to be discovered. In this place where stone meets water and the horizon meets the sky, ancient masters created a system capable of guiding the king's soul on a celestial journey. Astronomical orientations of the Pyramid of Khafra. The Pyramid of Khafre, towering majestically over the Giza Plateau, has long been considered one of the most enigmatic structures of ancient Egypt. Although smaller than the Great Pyramid of Khufu, its architecture and layout possess properties that cannot be explained by engineering alone. It might seem like just another royal tomb, but the precise alignment with the stars, the connection with solar phenomena, and the ritual landscape point to something more complex, a gigantic instrument of human interaction with the cosmos. The main axis of Khafra's pyramid is precisely aligned with the cardinal directions, with an accuracy of less than a few minutes of arc. This represents a level of precision unattainable by most ancient civilizations. But more importantly, the pyramid's orientation is aligned with the sun's movement throughout the year. On the solstices, the pyramid's shadows merge with the natural contours of the terrain, creating a visual effect reminiscent of a solar calendar. Such observations would be impossible without a profound understanding of astronomy. It's also striking that Khafra's pyramid and the Sphinx form a single alignment, oriented toward the sunrise on the vernal equinox. At this moment, a ray of sunlight illuminates the face of the Sphinx and then falls on the eastern face of the pyramid. This effect likely played a role in rituals associated with the renewal of royal power. Khafre was associated with the incarnation of the sun god, and the appearance of light on his monument symbolized the beginning of a new cycle. But the pyramid's main mystery is its connection to the constellations. Some researchers note that the position of Khafra's pyramid relative to Khufu and Menkaure reflects the structure of the three stars of Orion's belt. While this theory remains controversial, the coincidences are too precise to ignore. Perhaps the ancient masters sought to embody the celestial image on Earth, creating a star landscape in which each structure fulfilled its own role. If so, Khafra's pyramid is part of a vast cosmological mechanism. The pyramid's interior also possesses interesting properties. The burial chamber is located at ground level, an unusual design that distinguishes it from Khufu's chamber. It is oriented so that the north wall faces the ancient celestial pole. This suggests that, according to ancient belief, the king's soul was destined to travel to the undying stars, a group that included the then-current North Star, Polaris. Perhaps the architects used the chamber's orientation as a guide for the pharaoh's Ka. The exterior of Khafra's pyramid is surrounded by a stone barrier, creating an effect of sacred isolation. But shadow studies have shown that this barrier interacts with the sun on special days. During the summer solstice, the pyramid's shadow intersects its inner corner at a perfect angle, as if marking a hidden line. This phenomenon is clearly visible only in the morning, when the light is at its purest and most horizontal. It is possible that the most important initiation rituals were performed during these hours. The Valley of Khafra, connected by a causeway to the pyramid, represents another astronomical element. It is aligned with the sunset point at the winter solstice. Thus, the causeway of Khafra became the axis of two opposing cycles, rising in spring and setting in winter. This correspondence may be part of the ancient Egyptian concept of the day and night of the year, the idea that the annual cycle reflects the sun's path in the afterlife. Khafra, as a divine ruler, became a participant in this cycle. The most mysterious connection between Khafra's pyramid and the Sphinx is its relationship to the Sphinx. The Sphinx faces due east, toward the equinox sunrise. But if you follow the Sphinx's line of sight and connect it to the northern face of the pyramid, you'll find the direction of the star Regulus, the heart of Leo. The constellation Leo was associated with royal power, making this connection symbolically significant. Perhaps Khafra's pyramid and the Sphinx together represented a celestial map of power, in which the sun and stars confirmed the pharaoh's role. But the most astonishing element is the reflection of light on the pyramid's granite casing. Researchers note that on certain mornings, Khafra's facets reflect light so that the pyramid's apex appears to be ablaze. This effect is enhanced by the special shape of the upper blocks, which differ slightly from the lower ones. Perhaps the architects intended to create the impression of an ascending flame, symbolizing the pharaoh's ascension to Ra. Light became part of the architecture. There's also a deeper aspect. The pyramid's orientation aligns with the lines used to calculate the calendar for 1,000 years. Perhaps the pyramid was part of a system by which priests determined the beginning of the agricultural seasons. If so, then Khafra not only became a divine ruler, but also a link between heaven and the life of the country, an embodied calendar. The astronomical orientations of Khafra's pyramid are not mere coincidences. Every facet, every axis, and every shadow are elements of an ancient scientific and mystical system. Its purpose was not only to accompany the pharaoh on his path to eternity, but also to reflect the cosmic order on Earth. This pyramid is a stone formula in which the ancient masters encoded their view of the structure of the universe. Underground tunnels under the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza, carved from a single limestone block, has always served as a symbol of mystery. But its majestic figure conceals more than just an enigmatic expression. Beneath the sand, beneath its paws, beneath its foundation, lies an entire system of underground tunnels and niches discovered by archaeologists over the years. Their origin, purpose, and age continue to spark heated debate. Some consider them part of Khafre's ritual complex, while others believe they are traces of an even more ancient structure predating the Pyramid era. The first documented mention of a subterranean structure beneath the Sphinx dates back to the 19th century, when researchers noticed strange depressions in the ground around the monument. Later excavations revealed vertical shafts leading to small chambers beneath the north and south sides of the statue. These chambers were empty, but their walls showed signs of workmanship too delicate for natural processes. This meant human hands had been at work here. But for what purpose? The most famous chamber is located directly between the Sphinx's paws. Its entrance was hidden under a stone slab until the early 20th century. Inside, a niche was discovered, large enough for one person but empty of any objects. This emptiness has given rise to many theories. Perhaps ritual tablets, hymn records, or symbolic objects of power were once stored here. Some Egyptologists believe this niche served as a place where priests performed rituals to animate the statue, turning it into an intermediary between gods and humans. But the most mysterious part of the complex remains the long tunnel discovered on the southern side. It extends deep beneath the plateau, gradually widening and turning at right angles. Its walls are covered with fine erosion, but tool marks are visible in some areas. This means the tunnel was intentionally created, not formed naturally. But why was it built? Its alignment doesn't align with the axes of the pyramids, ruling out its role in funerary ceremonies. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed that several voids lie at considerable depth beneath the Sphinx's base. Some resemble natural caverns, while others are clearly artificial. Of particular interest is a chamber found beneath the base, in which sound propagates in an unusual manner. Even a quiet whisper produces a soft, multiple echo. This chamber may have been used for rituals involving the voice or breath, practices widely known in Egypt as a means of communicating with the divine. There are references to an altar chamber beneath the Sphinx's left shoulder. It was discovered in the early 20th century, but was soon filled in to strengthen the structure. Photographs from that time show a narrow staircase leading downward at an angle. A pedestal carved from the same limestone is visible within the chamber itself. If we assume that this was indeed an altar, then a hidden cult center, accessible only to high-ranking priests, may have existed beneath the Sphinx. They may have performed rituals there aimed at maintaining the connection between the king and the sun god. The legend of the library under the Sphinx, popularized in the 20th century, also arouses interest. Although the idea of a repository of ancient texts beneath the statue lacks archaeological evidence, the structure of the underground niches suggests the existence of a more developed system than what is currently visible. Many cavities beneath the plateau remain unexplored due to the risk of collapse or political restrictions. However, if we assume that the underground network continues further, it could have connected the Sphinx with the temples of Khafre, or even with the Valley of Khufu. One of the most unusual hypotheses is the idea of resonant corridors. Researchers have observed that some underground passages beneath the Sphinx amplify low vibrations. This may be due to the tunnel shape, which creates a standing wave effect. If ancient priests were aware of this property, they may have used the tunnels as ritual instruments, places where a person's voice would sound like the voice of a deity. Such effects are known in other Egyptian monuments, including the pyramids. But what's particularly interesting is the lack of completion in many of the corridors. Some tunnels end abruptly, as if construction had been halted. This has led to the hypothesis that the complex beneath the Sphinx was begun before the time of Khafre, but was later lost or altered. Geological studies show that the Sphinx's base was subject to erosion long before the Old Kingdom, meaning some cavities may predate the monument. It's possible the Sphinx was erected on the site of an older sanctuary. There are also more mystical hypotheses. For example, there's a theory that beneath the Sphinx was an awakening chamber used in royal initiation rites. A candidate for the throne would be led into it, where he would spend the night in silence, listening to the sounds of the underground tunnels. In the morning, he would emerge renewed, ready for his role as king. Although there's no evidence for this, the tunnel architecture itself creates the impression of a meditation space, full of profound acoustic effects. Today, many passages beneath the Sphinx are filled in or covered with metal bars. This is done to preserve the monument, but it also creates an atmosphere of mystery. What lies hidden behind these sealed passages? Why were some corridors never published in excavation plans? These are questions that remain unanswered. But one thing is clear. Beneath the Sphinx lies an entire world, one in which the ancient Egyptians combined stone, sound, and ritual. The underground tunnels beneath the Great Sphinx are the invisible part of the famous monument, the hidden heart of the Giza complex. They remind us that even the world's most famous monument harbors a secret, one that reaches deep into the depths of time. Perhaps one day, new technologies will allow us to fully explore these corridors, revealing another chapter of Egypt's ancient magic to the world. The pyramidal city of Abu Sir and its underground passages. Abu Sir, located between Saqqara and Giza, long remained in the shadow of more famous necropolises. However, it is here, among the ruins of the 5th Dynasty pyramids, that one of ancient Egypt's most enigmatic complexes lies. This includes not only temples and administrative buildings, but also a unique system of underground passages that connected pyramids, sun temples, and archival vaults. These tunnels, partly explored, partly collapsed, create the impression that Abu Sir was not just a necropolis, but a hidden city in the sands. The core of the complex is the Pyramid City, a vast area where priests, scribes, and service personnel lived. Thousands of papyrus fragments were found here, constituting one of the most important archives of ancient Egypt. These papyri describe rituals, construction projects, economic reports, and even details of everyday life. But most striking are the references to lower corridors, which were used for movement between temples during private ceremonies. These texts suggest a carefully organized structure existed underground. The first underground passages were discovered in the early 20th century. They were narrow tunnels carved into limestone with slightly arched ceilings for added strength. But the most intriguing thing about these tunnels was their acoustic properties. When a person walked through them, the sound of their footsteps spread strangely, as if the passage were alive. This may have been used in rituals. The echo could have created the illusion of the presence of gods or guardian spirits. One of the most mysterious tunnels leads from the Nusere Pyramid to the Solar Temple. It is located deep underground and has branches, some of which terminate in small rooms. These rooms have strange shapes, elongated ovals or nearly circular spaces reminiscent of resonance chambers. Archaeologists speculate that they may have been used for ritual chants or the storage of sacred objects. However, there is no definitive confirmation. Of particular interest are the thin, deep niches located along the corridors. Their shape is too narrow for storing objects and too inconvenient for use as lamps. Some researchers believe these were places for attaching wooden frames or metal plates, which would have created sound effects as air passed through them. If this theory is correct, the Abu Sir dungeons could have been part of a vast ritual instrument, tuned to the interplay of light, sound, and movement. The only fully explored underground complex is the burial system of Sahura's pyramid. It includes a long, sloping corridor opening into a series of chambers decorated with reliefs depicting the king surrounded by gods. But beneath the main corridor, ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed even deeper layers. Some of these align with the tunnels found in the temple complex. This suggests that the Pyramid City and the underground passages were part of a single system. An intriguing feature of Abu Sir is its proximity to a lake that existed in ancient times. Some corridors lead toward a former reservoir which could have been associated with purification rituals. In Egypt, water symbolized primordial chaos and renewal. Perhaps the priests used the underground passages to perform ceremonies associated with rebirth, in which water played a key role. This would also explain the presence of traces of moisture on the walls of some tunnels. Among the finds in the Abu Sir dungeons, stone tablets covered in incomplete inscriptions are particularly noteworthy. Some reveal only the initial and final symbols, with the main body of the text missing between them. This may indicate that the tablets were used as teaching aids or as part of ritual formulas that could not be fully written down. Perhaps the priests continued them mentally at the appropriate moment, keeping secrets within their circle. But the most astonishing discovery was made at the end of the 20th century, when the area between the pyramids of Sahur and Neferefre was explored. It turned out that intersecting galleries exist underground, one of which leads to a huge hall resembling a natural cave. However, the walls of the hall show signs of workmanship, and the ceiling has a smooth arch. This is not a natural formation, it is an artificial space intended for meetings or rituals. Perhaps priests gathered here for special ceremonies associated with the solar cult. The Pyramid City of Abu Sir is unique in that it combines three levels of existence: the surface, for life and work, sacred temples, for rituals, and the underworld, for secrets and transformation. The ancient Egyptians viewed the earth not simply as a support, but also as a space where spirits interacted with humans. The underground corridors of Abu Sir create a sense of immersion in a cosmological model, where every step is a piece of ancient knowledge. Today, many of these underground passages are buried or inaccessible. However, even what has been studied is astonishing in its richness of conception. Abu Sir was more than just a necropolis. It was a ritual mechanism that linked the king, the priests, and the cosmos into a single system. Its secrets are revealed slowly, as if the very walls of the dungeons preserve the memory of a time when light, sound, and stone merged into a single sacred language. Stone Solar Boat of Sahur. The name of Pharaoh Sahur of the 5th dynasty is less well known than that of the Giza pyramid giants, but his religious architecture left one of the most enigmatic traces of the Old Kingdom. Among the ruins of his pyramid complex at Abu Sir, archaeologists have discovered a unique structure, a massive boat pit that once held a stone solar boat. Although the boat itself has long since disappeared, traces of its existence raise questions that remain unanswered. Boats in the burial complexes of Egyptian kings were usually made of wood. Their symbolism was associated with the sun god Ra, who traveled across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. Wooden vessels symbolized the journey of the pharaoh's soul as it joined the heavenly vessel. However, in Sahura's complex, traces of a vessel made not of wood but of stone were discovered. This is unprecedented, as a stone boat could not float. It was a symbol, but a symbol of special power. Sahura's boat pit is over 30 meters long. Its walls are meticulously crafted, and the base is leveled with astonishing precision. Researchers believe the boat was composed of stone blocks arranged in the shape of a ship's hull. Some traces on the walls indicate that the stone may have been coated with red paint, the color of solar energy. Thus, the boat could symbolize the morning sun, rising from the underworld and making its way across the sky. But why did Sahura choose stone instead of wood? One hypothesis holds that the stone boat served not for the soul's journey, but for storing ritual objects associated with the solar cult. Perhaps it contained vessels, statues, or stone tablets used in rituals. However, no evidence has been found. The boat disappeared long before the first excavations. All that remains are traces in the stone and a void, raising many speculations. There is also a theory that the stone boat served as part of an architectural mechanism. The pit is positioned so that on the solstices a ray of sunlight penetrates its center, illuminating the space in a special way. If a polished surface or gold plate was inside, the reflected light could have played a role in the rebirth of the sun ritual. Perhaps the priests used these effects in annual ceremonies affirming the king's power and his connection to Ra. But the most intriguing feature is the geometry of the boat pit. Its axis is not strictly aligned with the cardinal directions, but slightly offset. This offset coincides with the azimuth of sunrise during a particular season. This suggests that the stone boat was connected to the agricultural cycle, which depended on the Nile flood. At such times, the sun played a role in determining the beginning of the new year. If the boat was connected to the calendar, it could have been Egypt's oldest solar instrument, created long before the obelisks. Archaeologists discovered several stone platforms arranged in a stepped pattern near the boat pit. Their purpose remains unclear. Perhaps they were places where priests performed rituals before descending into the pit. Or these platforms served as foundations for wooden structures that supported the covering over the boat. Some researchers suggest the platforms may have been part of a complex mechanism involving the movement of light, water, and dust. Wind passing through the narrow openings created a fine, vibrating sound, an effect that could have been used in rituals. An interesting trace was also found beneath the base of the pit, a thin channel leading towards Sahure's temple. Its direction coincides with the temple's main axis, suggesting a symbolic connection between them. If we assume the channel was used to channel water or air, then the boat could have been part of a ritual in which the elements played a key role. Perhaps the priests filled the pit with water, creating a reflection of the sky, a symbolic ocean of origins from which the sun emerged. But the most impressive discovery was the discovery of stone fragments resembling boat hull parts near Abu Sir. They are curved and have a carefully worked surface. Some pieces bear traces of drilling, indicating that the elements were joined with stone or wooden tenons. If these fragments truly belong to Sahure's stone boat, it could be fully reconstructed. However, their location away from the boat pit raises questions. Were they moved later, or were they part of another structure? Another mystery is that ritual texts found in Abu Sir mention a boat from the mountain in which Ra ascends to the sky. This is an unusual expression, as boats have always been associated with wood. Perhaps it was this phrase that inspired Sahure to create a stone boat as an embodiment of the sacred symbol. The boat from the mountain symbolized strength, steadfastness, and eternity, qualities necessary for the king's journey beyond the grave. Sahure's stone solar boat is both an engineering enigma and a spiritual symbol. It combines ideas of cosmology, natural cycles, rituals of rebirth, and architectural alchemy. Although only traces of the boat remain, its presence is felt in the geometry of the complex, in the reliefs, and in the emptiness of the pit, as if it still fills the space with the energy of the ancient sun. Perhaps future research will uncover fragments or reveal a deeper meaning hidden within the stone form. The secret western corridor of the Pyramid of Unas. The Pyramid of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, is best known for the fact that the famous pyramid texts, Egypt's oldest sacred formulas, first appeared in its burial chamber. But beyond these written rituals, the monument structure conceals something even more mysterious. A western corridor, barely mentioned in archaeological records and partially hidden under rubble. Its purpose and connection to the pyramid's internal system remain one of the most intriguing mysteries of the Old Kingdom. The Unas pyramid has a classic structure: a descending corridor, a horizontal gallery, a burial chamber, and anti-vaults designed to distribute the weight. However, the western corridor differs from all other elements. It is not located along the main axis, does not follow the traditional ritual route and, most oddly, does not directly connect to any known chamber. This suggests that it served a special function, perhaps one hidden from even most of the priests. The corridor was discovered by chance during clearing of the inner complex in the mid-20th century. Workers stumbled upon a narrow passage hidden behind a layer of rubble. Its walls were more roughly finished than those of the main chambers, but the corridor's shape was precise and deliberate. It descended at a slight angle, then turned sharply and ended in massive masonry. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a void behind the masonry, but its size and shape were unknown. This led to the hypothesis that an unknown chamber might be hidden behind the western corridor. Some archaeologists believe the corridor was part of a false route intended to confuse looters. However, this theory is questionable. False corridors usually lead to dead ends and are not connected to the architectural logic of the complex. The western corridor of Unas, however, was constructed with mathematical precision and strictly oriented toward the west, the symbolic direction of the underworld. This suggests that the corridor had a ritual purpose. A distinctive feature of the corridor is its acoustics. Sound propagates strangely. Even a whisper is reflected with a delay, creating the sensation of a second voice. This property is reminiscent of the acoustic effects of some underground chambers of Abusir and Dashur. The corridor may have been used for rituals of verbal awakening, ceremonies in which the priest's voice was supposed to activate certain formulas, transforming them into living force. The pyramid texts contain references to voices of the West opening the gates of the Duat. The western corridor could have been a literal embodiment of this idea. The reliefs found at the entrance to the corridor consist of rows of small indentations. They are spaced at regular intervals and form a rhythmic pattern. These may have been places for attaching wooden beams or lamps. However, another theory suggests that the indentations may have served as markers for priests walking along the corridor in the dark. Ritual texts speak of the king's path, which must be followed by signs. Perhaps the corridor was a symbolic path for the soul, guided by these markings. The western wall of the pyramid was traditionally associated with the afterlife, the place where the sun set each evening. Therefore, the location of the corridor in the western part of the complex has a profound sacred significance. If the corridor truly led to a hidden chamber, then this chamber could have been a symbolic sanctuary of the dead, the place where the royal soul passed into the other world. In this case, the sealed masonry served not as a barrier against robbers, but as a ritual seal that could not be broken. There's another interesting observation. The angle of the corridor almost matches the angle of the sun's rays at sunset on the vernal equinox. If a small opening or reflective surface existed inside the pyramid in ancient times, a ray of sunlight could have penetrated the corridor and illuminated it all the way to the end. This would have transformed the western corridor into a kind of solar instrument, a channel through which light accompanied the king's soul on its evening journey. While this is still just a hypothesis, it is consistent with the mystical function of the pyramids. Archaeological exploration of the western corridor is complicated by the risk of collapse. Many sections are too fragile for human passage. However, modern laser scanners have revealed that the corridor walls have small cup-like depressions. They are located at chest height and, at first glance, appear random. But if you examine them as a system, a pattern emerges. It's possible that symbolic objects, figurines, vessels, or stone discs used in rites of passage were placed in the depressions. The most puzzling aspect of the study is that ground-penetrating radar detects a rectangular air cavity behind the masonry concealing the end of the corridor. This cavity is too small to serve as a burial chamber, but large enough to house sacred objects. It may be a secret repository for ritual texts or objects associated with the reign of Unas. However, no one has yet dared to open the masonry, as some believe such intervention could disrupt the ancient ritual balance. Some Egyptologists believe the western corridor is connected to the pyramid texts, which cover the walls of the burial chamber. These texts contain instructions for the ascension of the king, but alongside them are formulas dedicated to the hidden gods of the West, about whom almost nothing is known. Perhaps the hidden chamber served as a place where these deities received the royal soul, and the corridor was a transition between the earthly world and the secret realm of divine transformation. Other researchers see the corridor as a remnant of an older structure, a remnant from earlier construction phases. The Pyramid of Unas was built on the site of an older necropolis, and corridors from previous eras did indeed exist underground. However, the direction of the Western Corridor and its quality suggest a later origin. It was most likely created deliberately as part of Unas's ritual complex. The secret Western Corridor remains one of the most inaccessible mysteries of Egyptian architecture. Its hidden function, strange acoustics, possible lighting effects, and connection to Western mythology create the impression that it is not just an architectural element, but a threshold between two worlds. Perhaps future technology will allow the hidden chamber to be explored without destruction, and then the world will discover what Pharaoh Unas chose to hide in his final home, a place where stone has remained silent for over 4,000 years. Archival vaults of the Abusir Papyrus Complex. The Abusir Papyrus Complex is one of the most underappreciated mysteries of the Old Kingdom. While the attention of tourists and researchers is focused on the pyramids and temples, it was here, among the ruins of officials' quarters and religious buildings of the 5th dynasty, that some of the most important written sources of ancient Egypt were found. But the papyri themselves are just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden underground were vaulted chambers designed to store texts that likely formed the basis of priestly knowledge and the ideology of the ruler. The first traces of these vaults were discovered during excavations at the Temple of Sahur. Carefully laid out stone rooms were found there, their walls bearing traces of wooden shelving. But it wasn't this that was surprising. It was their location. The rooms were located deep beneath the floor, as if deliberately concealed. Inside were papyrus fragments, many of which were badly damaged, but their contents allowed us to reconstruct the structure of ancient administrative and religious practices. However, the most important mystery is that the vaults discovered first turned out to be only part of a much more complex system. During further excavations, researchers discovered underground corridors leading to new storage areas. These corridors were remarkably reinforced. Their walls were made of smooth limestone, and the ceiling was vaulted, sometimes reinforced with projections to prevent sand from falling. It seemed the builders strove to create the most durable structure possible, capable of withstanding not only time, but also external influences. This is unusual for buildings seemingly designed solely for document storage. A strange feature is the climate control of these vaults. Some rooms had narrow vertical shafts leading to the surface. These allowed air to circulate, maintaining a constant coolness and dryness, ideal conditions for preserving papyrus. However, traces of golden dust, the nature of which remains unknown, have been discovered in some shafts. Perhaps the priests used special aromatic mixtures or resins to prevent the scrolls from deteriorating. This approach was significantly ahead of its time. The complex itself, judging by its structure, was organized as both a library and an archive. Fragments of tablets containing tax records were found in one hall, records of sacrifices in another, and instructions for performing rituals in a third. But among these finds, the papyri devoted to construction stand out. They contain instructions for craftsmen, descriptions of stone-cutting techniques, and labor allocation. This suggests that Abusir was the center for planning royal projects. But what's particularly intriguing are the references to the Temple of the Sun lists, which have remained undiscovered. These lists may have included astronomical observations, ritual calendar cycles, and possibly cosmogonic treatises. Some papyri speak of secret formulas that were passed on only to high priests. They may have been kept in a closed section of the archive, access to which was strictly restricted. And it is precisely this closed section, judging by archaeological evidence, that has not yet been fully explored. The existence of a hidden section of the archive is indicated by the strange geometric features of the vaults. Several rooms are arranged so that their walls do not align with the external contours of the buildings. This creates the impression of a double layer, an outer and an inner one, with the inner layer not reflected in the complex's layout. Ground-penetrating radar revealed voids behind the thick walls, but accessing them is impossible without causing destruction. What lies within? Perhaps these are rooms that house texts considered too sacred or dangerous for the general priesthood. Another enigmatic element is the system of inscriptions found on the walls of some vaults. These inscriptions are made in red ochre and consist of short, frequently repeated symbols. They are not typical hieroglyphic script. Researchers believe these are the builder's technological markings, but others suggest they are a kind of access code, instructions for initiates to navigate the complex system of corridors. If so, the archival vaults were not simply a storage area, but part of a ritual labyrinth. Interestingly, tall stone pedestals were discovered in some vaults. They are located in the center of the rooms, and their purpose remains unclear. Perhaps they supported statues of gods guarding the texts. However, it has been suggested that the pedestals were used for reading papyri during special ceremonies. If a priest read a text aloud while standing beneath the vault, the acoustics amplified the voice, transforming it into a powerful multiple echo. This could have created the effect of a voice of the deity, making reading not just a process of transmitting information, but a sacred act. Some researchers suggest that the archival complex was connected to the solar temple of Nusere, the most important religious building in Abu Sir. The vaults may have served as a place where priests recorded their observations of the movements of the sun and stars. If this complex was indeed a center of astronomy, then calculations related to the calendar, agricultural cycles, and ritual festivals could have been stored here. In this case, the Papyrus Archive served not only as an administrative center, but also as a scientific institute of antiquity. But there is also a more mysterious theory, that the Abu Sir archival vaults contained magical texts, formulas capable of opening paths between worlds. This theory is supported by the strange images found on some fragments. Figurines of gods with unnaturally elongated arms, spiral symbols, and images of handleless doors. Such symbols are rarely found in classical rituals, making them a subject of particular interest. Perhaps these were spells or descriptions of initiation rituals. What's also intriguing is that some of the vaults show signs of deliberate destruction. The stone slabs that sealed the entrances were knocked out from the inside. This suggests that the priests may have abandoned the complex in haste, taking some of the texts with them. Perhaps political changes at the end of the 5th dynasty led to the closure of the archive, and some of its contents were either moved or destroyed to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. But where did these texts disappear to? Perhaps they were hidden elsewhere, perhaps beneath one of the sun temples. The archival vaults of the Abu Sir Papyrus Complex are the heart of the intellectual life of the Old Kingdom. They contain administrative documents, ritual texts, astronomical records, and enigmatic symbols. Their architecture hints at a closed system of knowledge accessible only to the elite. Yet, to this day, much of these vaults remains unexplored. Perhaps further research will reveal another layer of ancient Egyptian knowledge, what priests wrote down for the deities, not for humans. Celestial texts of the era of Pepi I. The reign of Pepi I, one of the most influential pharaohs of the 6th dynasty, marked a time of profound changes in Egyptian religious and ritual practices. It was then that new forms of sacred inscriptions emerged, later known as celestial texts. They focused on the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, his connection with the heavens and the solar cycles. These texts differ from the pyramid texts in that they include complex symbolism and astronomical indications, reflecting ancient understandings of the structure of the universe. However, only a small portion of them have survived to this day. The first fragments of celestial texts were discovered in the funerary temple of Pepi I. Thin lines of hieroglyphs covered in blue paint symbolizing the sky were preserved on the remains of the walls. These inscriptions contain not only ritual formulas, but also unusual descriptions of the paths of light along which the king's soul was supposed to ascend to the stellar realm. Researchers note that the text is written in a style distinct from traditional funeral formulas. It is more poetic, full of metaphors and allusions to astronomical events. No less mysterious is the reference to the Great Staircase, which connects earth to heaven. Celestial texts describe Pepi I ascending this ladder, guided by two shining gods. Some scholars suggest this is a symbolic depiction of the Milky Way and its bright stars, which served as landmarks in the night sky. If so, the ancient Egyptians, long before the advent of sophisticated astronomy, used sophisticated observations to create their religious imagery. Interestingly, celestial texts often describe carts of light on which the gods transport the pharaoh through the celestial spheres. These images are unusual in Egyptian tradition, which is primarily associated with boats. However, texts from Pepi's time also contain the expression celestial boat, which contains the power of the east wind. Perhaps such imagery reflects a synthesis of ritual representations and astronomical observations when the movement of the stars was perceived as the journey of celestial beings. Some fragments of the text describe the 7 luminous gates the king must pass through before reaching the abode of Osiris. Each gate is associated with a specific star or constellation. Researchers suggest that this may be an early form of a celestial map used by priests during rituals. However, the lack of a complete text remains a problem. Many fragments are severely damaged, and some parts have been lost entirely. The most enigmatic celestial texts were found not in the pyramid of Pepi I, but in the ruins of his northern temple. Stone slabs discovered in the ruins contain symbols reminiscent of star charts. These lines form complex geometric shapes, triangles, intersecting arcs, and parallels. If interpreted as a diagram, they correspond to the lines connecting the bright stars of the constellations Ursa Major and Orion. However, a definitive interpretation remains elusive. The drawings are too fragmentary, and the context is lost. Modern researchers suggest that the celestial texts of the time of Pepi I may have been connected to rituals of astronomical observation. Temples of the 6th dynasty featured special platforms aimed at the eastern horizon, the rising point of Sirius, a star that played a crucial role in the Egyptian calendar. Priests may have recorded the results of their observations as symbols and formulas, which they later incorporated into ritual texts. This explains the complexity and multi-layered nature of their content. Of particular note are references to a path that never darkens. One fragment reads, "Pepi walks along a path of light that shines even on a moonless night." This may be a description of the Milky Way, visible in the desert with extraordinary clarity. In ancient times, it was perceived as a heavenly river or a path of souls. Thus, Pepi's celestial texts could describe the king's journey along the galactic Milky Way, which, in their understanding, was the path to immortality. No less interesting are the references to secret stars that the common people do not know. One passage states that these stars are revealed only to priests who possess knowledge of time. Some modern researchers believe that this refers to stars visible only on the southern horizon, which disappeared from Egyptian view due to the slow movement of the celestial sphere. If so, Pepi's texts may contain ancient observations made long before the construction of the pyramids. But the most mysterious part of the celestial texts remains the description of the House of Light, in which the king is to find a radiant voice. Some interpretations consider this place to be a ritual chamber in the Pyramid of Pepi. However, there is a theory that the House of Light is an allegory for the stellar space associated with certain constellations. Perhaps this refers to Orion's belt, which in Egyptian mythology symbolized Osiris. If so, the celestial texts describe the journey of the king's soul to the god of resurrection. Archaeologists also discovered small ceramic figurines found near fragments of texts. These figurines depict seated gods with outstretched arms pointing upward. The arms form a square within which a small sheet of papyrus or an amulet was likely placed. These may have been text guardians participating in the reading ritual. Such artifacts are rare in later periods, highlighting the uniqueness of religious practices during the time of Pepi I. It is believed that the celestial texts were used not only for funerary rituals, but also for the training of young priests. Their complex structure, rich in symbols and allegories, may have been part of an educational system that imparted knowledge about the stars, time, and rituals. Moreover, the texts were so sacred that they were copied only on stone or on special papyri, produced in limited quantities. The celestial texts of the reign of Pepi I offer rare evidence of how the ancient Egyptians perceived the cosmos. They combine astronomical observations, mythology, ritual practice, and profound philosophy. These texts create an image of the universe as a living space in which the pharaoh plays a central role, connecting earth and sky. However, most of these texts are lost, and only fragments offer hints of the vast system of knowledge hidden in the reign of Pepi I. Perhaps further excavations at the Pepi Temple complex will reveal new fragments of celestial texts. Then we will be able to fully understand how the ancient priests envisioned the celestial path leading the pharaoh to eternity. For now, these texts remain a mystery, precious fragments of a great teaching, only partially preserved, but still capable of shedding light on the ancient rationality and mystical wisdom of Egypt. Stone sanctuaries of Pepi II. The reign of Pepi II, one of ancient Egypt's longest-lived pharaohs, marked the final stage of the Old Kingdom. His reign lasted over 90 years, leaving behind numerous architectural monuments reflecting both the political ambitions and religious ideology of the time. Among these monuments, the stone sanctuaries scattered around his pyramid complex are particularly notable. They represent a complex system of religious structures reflecting the ideas of the divine birth, ascension, and renewal of the king. However, the purpose of many of these sanctuaries remains a mystery. The first sanctuary discovered near the pyramid of Pepi II is a small stone pavilion decorated with bas-reliefs depicting the young king. Scenes depicting the goddess Hathor offering Pepi vessels of water, symbolizing purification, are prominent on the walls. However, what's surprising is that the sanctuary is not located on the main ritual axis of the complex, but off to the side, as if it were intended only for select priests. Some researchers believe that special rites of renewing royal power were held here. The sanctuary structure is unusual. Its inner chamber is narrow and elongated, and the ceiling is carved to create the impression of movement. The stone slabs form parallel lines pointing upward, as if symbolizing ascending energy. Under certain lighting conditions, the walls appear to move. This is an optical effect, but it may have been used in rituals as a way to induce a trance-like state in the priest. Another sanctuary, dubbed the Hall of Quiet Light by archaeologists, is located north of the pyramid. It received this name because of the unusual window openings located high under the ceiling. They allowed a soft, diffused light to enter, creating a unique atmosphere in the room. Remains of limestone dust mixed with aromatic resins were found on the floor. Such mixtures were often used in purification rituals. It is possible that ceremonies preparing priests for participation in larger rituals were held here. Of particular interest is the sanctuary, built on a natural rock platform. It is distinguished by its crude, almost primitive architecture, massive blocks, unevenly laid walls, and a lack of decorative elements. However, in its center is a round niche decorated with fine engravings. These depict stars and lines intersecting them at various angles, reminiscent of a primitive map of the night sky. Researchers speculate that the sanctuary may have been connected to astronomical observations conducted by priests on special nights of the year. There are even more mysterious structures. One of them is a stone room without an entrance. It was discovered using ground-penetrating radar and partially uncovered by archaeologists. So far, not a single door or passage has been found. The room is completely enclosed. Traces of a thin coating, possibly made of plaster, are visible on its walls. Such coatings were used in places where space revitalization rituals were performed. Some researchers believe the room was a symbolic receptacle for the king's ka, his life essence. Perhaps the priests charged it with ritual energy. Another enigmatic element of the complex are the stone platforms located along the road leading to the pyramid. Their surface is covered with circular depressions cut at regular intervals. At first glance, these might appear to be traces of pillars, but the depth and shape of the holes are inconsistent with the attachment of wooden structures. Some scholars suggest that they housed stone discs used in rituals. Such discs have been found in other complexes of the 6th dynasty and may have symbolized the solar and lunar cycles. A special place among the sanctuaries is occupied by the Temple of the Southern Horizon. This small but elegant structure is located directly on the line of the sun during the summer solstice. Inside the temple is a rectangular hall, the walls of which are decorated with reliefs depicting Pepi II receiving gifts from the gods. However, the main mystery lies in the opening in the ceiling, precisely aligned with the sun. On the day of the solstice, a beam of light penetrates the temple and illuminates the central stone set into the floor. This creates the impression of a descent of divine energy. The temple also contains a narrow passage leading to a closed chamber. The chamber was empty, but its walls were covered with fine lines reminiscent of wind patterns. These may be symbolic images associated with breath and life force. Some researchers believe the chamber was used for rituals in which priests sought to breathe life into statues or sacred objects. Among Pepi II's sanctuaries, one particularly notable feature is the House of Silence. It is a semi-subterranean structure constructed so that sound virtually disappears within. Even a loud voice produces no echo. This property astonishes researchers. Old Kingdom architecture rarely features such acoustics. The House of Silence may have served as a place for meditation or rituals requiring complete silence. The interior walls are covered with water symbols, possibly suggesting a connection to subterranean waters or the mythological primordial ocean. In addition to the cult sanctuaries, archaeologists discovered several narrow corridors leading deep into the hill. They are too shallow for comfortable passage. They may not have been intended for human use, but for the symbolic movement of energy or light. Traces of soot were discovered in one of these corridors, a rarity for sanctuaries. This may indicate that torches were used here for nighttime rituals. Alternatively, the corridor served as a place where priests observed the stars through a narrow opening in the ceiling. The stone sanctuaries of Pepi II reflect a complex interplay of architecture, ritual, and astronomy. Their diversity suggests that the religious practices of the 6th dynasty were richer and more multi-layered than previously thought. They included rituals of light, silence, the movement of air, and interaction with the elements. But most importantly, each sanctuary is associated with the idea of the king's ascension, his eternal renewal, and participation in the cosmic order. These sanctuaries remain crucial evidence of the spiritual life of the late Old Kingdom. Many of them have not yet been fully explored. Perhaps new chambers are hidden beneath layers of sand, which will help us understand how the priests of Pepi II's time created sacred spaces where stone became a living symbol. For now, the sanctuaries of Pepi II remain a mystery, a reflection of an ancient world in which humanity sought to connect with the cosmos. Sand bastions of Memphis. Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt during the Old Kingdom, was not only a political and religious center, but also a place where architecture acquired sacred meaning. Among its many structures, the so-called sand bastions, mysterious fortifications and platforms partially buried beneath a layer of sand, are of particular interest. These structures are mentioned in several ancient inscriptions, but their true purpose remains debated. They appear to be simultaneously defensive, ritual, and astronomical, making them a unique phenomenon for the Old Kingdom. The first mention of sand bastions appeared in the 19th century, when European archaeologists noticed elevations of compacted sand and stone debris along the ancient Nile River bed. Initially, they were mistaken for the remains of ancient coastal fortifications. However, later excavations revealed that these structures were rectangular in shape, with perfect angles, and their interior walls were lined with limestone slabs. This immediately ruled out their random origin and demonstrated that the bastions were part of a carefully planned complex. The largest of the discovered structures is a rectangle approximately 100 meters long, with an inner courtyard surrounded by high sandstone walls. Remains of columns and a platform resembling an altar were discovered within the courtyard. However, no sacrificial pits or traces of fire were found. Traces of reliefs depicting processions of people carrying symbolic objects, wands, vessels, and miniature boats, were preserved on the walls. This suggests that the bastion was used not for defense, but as a religious space. The structure of the sandstone bastions is particularly intriguing, multi-layered, as if designed to control temperature and humidity. The bottom layer consists of coarse sand laid at an angle. The top layer is a compacted mixture of sand and clay, reinforced with stone blocks. This design allowed for temperature fluctuations and protected the interior from collapse. This demonstrates the deep engineering expertise of the Memphis builders, a skill often underestimated. But why was it necessary to build such powerful fortifications around religious buildings? Some researchers believe the bastions served as barriers separating the sacred space from the outside world. Symbolic isolation was an important part of Egyptian religion, where sanctuaries were separated from the chaos of the desert. However, the sandstone bastions of Memphis were too massive to be typical ritual enclosures. This suggests they served other functions as well. One of the most intriguing features of the bastions is their orientation. Most of them are built with precise alignment to the cardinal directions. The largest bastion is oriented due north, but its corners are slightly tilted by a few minutes of arc, similar to the pylons of some later temples, which are oriented toward specific stars. This may indicate that the bastions served as observation points for the sky. Perhaps priests used them to determine the positions of the stars and calculate the dates of rituals. The discovery of a narrow stone platform with a carved circle in the center in one of the bastions also supports the astronomical hypothesis. The circle's diameter matches that of ancient solar discs used in rituals. If the platform was the mounting site for a solar disk, the bastion could have been part of a solar temple. But why, then, is it located so far from the known temple complexes of Memphis? This remains a mystery. There is also a more mystical hypothesis that the bastions served as portals between the ritual spaces of Memphis and the Nile Delta. The Egyptians believed that certain places possessed special energies. Some slabs were found depicting serpentine creatures symbolizing the powers of the earth. Perhaps the bastions were used for rituals aimed at controlling the forces of nature or connecting with the underworld. No less mysterious are the underground chambers hidden beneath the bastions. In one of them, a room with a flat floor and a perfectly carved rectangular recess was discovered. Remains of blue and gold pigments were found in the recess. These colors were associated with the sky and the sun. It's possible the room served as a site for rituals associated with sunrise or sunset. However, the lack of inscriptions makes this impossible to say for certain. There is evidence that the bastions may have also been used as storage facilities. Remains of grain and fragments of wooden chests were found in one of the side rooms. However, this most likely dates to a later period, when the sacred structures lost their original purpose and were reused by local residents. The original purpose of the bastions, however, was clearly much more complex. Some researchers suggest that the sandstone bastions of Memphis were part of a flood control system. Their massive walls could have served as barriers, directing water into specific channels. This explains their proximity to the ancient Nile riverbed. This hypothesis is also supported by the presence of special channels discovered under one of the bastions. They are directed toward ancient irrigation fields. However, this would still leave unexplained the sacred nature of the reliefs. The sand bastions likely served multiple functions. They could have served simultaneously as religious, astronomical, and engineering structures. This combination is rare, but it reflects the nature of ancient Egyptian culture, where the boundaries between religion, science, and engineering were blurred. Everything built in Memphis served both humans and gods. Today, most of the sand bastions are hidden beneath layers of sand. Only their tips are barely visible amid the desert plain. But work continues, and each new discovery brings more questions than answers. Perhaps another line of bastions lies hidden beneath the sand, forming a gigantic network that could have been part of a unified urban plan for Memphis. If so, Memphis would appear to be not just a capital, but a unique observatory city where every stone was incorporated into a cosmic architecture. The sandstone bastions of Memphis remain among the most enigmatic structures of the ancient world. Their scale, orientation, underground chambers, and symbols point to a complex system of knowledge that fused engineering, astronomy, and religion. Perhaps future research will reveal the hidden intentions of their builders. But it is already clear that the bastions were more than just structures. They were part of a greater idea, that humanity should live in harmony with the forces of nature and the cosmos. The Lost Vaults of Meidum. Meidum, one of Egypt's most enigmatic archaeological complexes, is known primarily for its unusual pyramid, a transitional form between a stepped and a smooth structure. However, much less attention has been paid to the underground structures hidden beneath this ancient monument. Over the past centuries, researchers have repeatedly discovered traces of vaulted chambers leading deep into the plateau's depths. These hidden spaces, known as the Lost Vaults of Meidum, remain one of the most elusive and controversial topics in Egyptology. The first mention of unusual underground structures appears in reports by 18th-century European archaeologists. They wrote of strange cracks in the pyramid's base, which, according to locals, led to underground caves. However, initial attempts to penetrate them ended in failure. Passages collapsed, and sand quickly filled the space. It was only in the late 19th century that the existence of a long corridor leading at an angle into the southern part of the complex was documented. This corridor turned out to be only part of a much more complex system. Its walls are covered with fine lines carved at chest height. These lines look like tool marks, but their regularity suggests a symbolic nature. Perhaps this was a kind of code marking the initiate's path. Ancient texts refer to the concept of a road of signs, which a priest must follow to invoke the forces of light. Perhaps this corridor was such a path. The most astonishing feature of the underground vaults is their complex acoustics. When researchers first entered one of the chambers, they noticed that their footsteps echoed strangely. Even a quiet sound generated a vibration felt in the chest. This indicates the resonant properties of the stone. Perhaps the ancient architects intentionally created such effects. Sound played a significant role in Egyptian religious tradition. It was believed that the voice could open gates between worlds. Therefore, the underground vaults may have been part of a ritual associated with the awakening of powers. A perfectly leveled stone platform was found in one of the vaults. Its surface bears marks resembling circular imprints. Some researchers speculate that vessels or discs, possibly metal, were placed on the platform. If so, the combination of sound and metal could have created unusual vibrations. The ancient Egyptians knew that vibrations influenced consciousness. It's possible that the vaults of Medum served as a site for trance rituals or priestly initiations. The orientation of the vaults also raises many questions. Some of them face due east, corresponding to sunrise on certain days of the year. This may indicate a connection between the vaults and the solar cult that developed under Pharaoh Snefru, who, according to scholars, built the Medum pyramid. If the vaults are oriented toward sunrise, they could have been used for rites of renewal and rebirth, symbolizing the first light of a new cycle. A particularly interesting find was made in one of the side corridors. A niche carved in the shape of an arch was discovered there. Faint symbols resembling star charts are visible on its walls. Some dots are connected by thin lines, forming figures resembling constellations. If these are indeed astronomical charts, then the Medum vaults could have served as a place for observing the sky, not from the surface, but through narrow openings in the ceilings. This would explain the strange shafts discovered above the vaults. It is believed that the underground vaults may have been part of the original architectural design, later forgotten or lost. The Medum pyramid likely underwent several construction phases. It's possible that in the early stages, the underground vaults played a key role in the ritual complex. However, after the architectural style changed and the transition to smooth pyramids, their significance diminished. Over time, the entrances were filled in and the memory of the vaults faded. There's also a hypothesis that the vaults were used as storage. Some archaeologists believe they may have held sacred objects, statues, ritual instruments, or texts. However, no significant artifacts have been found there to date, casting doubt on this theory. It's worth noting, however, that most of the vaults have not been explored. It's possible that hidden rooms are located deeper in areas unexplored by modern specialists. One of the most puzzling elements is the discovery of traces of water. In some vaults, the walls are covered in a coating characteristic of rooms that were once damp. However, Medum is located at a considerable distance from the ancient Nile riverbed. How could water have ended up under the pyramid? Perhaps the vaults were part of a ritual involving the symbolic use of water, as in purification rites. In this case, the water was carried by hand by priests and used to create reflections or acoustic effects. But there's a more radical hypothesis that the vaults were connected to an even more ancient structure that predated the pyramid. Some geological studies indicate that beneath Medum there are signs of an artificially leveled platform that could have been part of a megalithic structure. Perhaps the pyramid was built atop an older sanctuary, and the vaults are remnants of this ancient architecture. This would explain the unusual style and resonant properties of the rooms. Legends must also be considered. Locals claimed that beneath the pyramid were breathing rooms. This may refer to air vibrations within the vaults. Indeed, some corridors have openings through which wind passes, creating a mysterious sound. This phenomenon intensifies at night when the temperature drops sharply. Perhaps in ancient times, these sounds were perceived as the voice of the sanctuary. The most impressive discovery was the discovery of a series of stone slabs in one of the vaults. They are carved with symbols reminiscent of inscriptions from the early stages of writing. Some researchers believe this may be a proto-writing or even a ritual code used by priests. If so, Medum provides a key to understanding the development of Egyptian writing. However, despite numerous discoveries, most of the vaults remain inaccessible. Many corridors are too dangerous to penetrate. Modern technology allows us to peer inside using radar and microcameras, but so far this has only confirmed the existence of a vast labyrinth beneath the pyramid. Its purpose is not only ritualistic, but also cosmological. The vaults of Medum may have been a model of the underworld, created by priests for ceremonies and observations. The lost vaults of Medum are more than just an architectural phenomenon. They are part of an ancient philosophy in which space, sound, light, and stone formed a unified language of communication with the gods. Perhaps it was here that the idea of the passage between worlds was born, the path the pharaoh had to take to attain eternal life. And while many of the vault's secrets remain hidden, their exploration brings us closer to understanding the spiritual legacy of ancient Egypt. Stone signs of Hentaway. Hentaway, an ancient necropolis in western Memphis, has long attracted the attention of researchers with its unusual stone structures. Unlike monumental pyramids or temples, this complex consists of low platforms, elongated slabs, and enigmatic stone signs carved into the surface of rock outcrops. Their style is unlike classical hieroglyphs. These symbols and forms are so ancient and archaic that their origin remains controversial. Many believe these signs date back to the early stages of the development of Egyptian writing, but others see in them traces of a sacred system that existed parallel to official writing. The first mention of the Hentaway stone signs appears in 19th century reports when researchers noticed strange notches on stone slabs located around burial shafts. These notches were too regular to be natural cracks. However, their arrangement appeared chaotic, making it difficult to understand their meaning. Only decades later did archaeologists discern repeating patterns: 3 lines intersecting at an angle, circles inscribed within rectangles, and parallel lines extending toward the horizon. One of the most astonishing discoveries was the central slab, a huge stone block carved with a spiral spiraling toward the center. The spiral is decorated with several rings, each with subtle markings. Some scholars speculate that this may be an ancient representation of time or a calendar cycle. The spiral symbol is common in Middle Eastern cultures, but is virtually unknown in Egypt. If this sign truly reflects a calendar system, then Hentaway contains traces of an alternative chronology that existed outside the official priestly tradition. Another group of symbols resembles primitive constellations. 3 dots, arranged in a triangle, are located next to 4 parallel lines. This shape is suspiciously reminiscent of an image of the constellation Orion and the stars surrounding it. If such an image is indeed present at Hentaway, it means that the ancient inhabitants of the region used the stone as a means of recording celestial observations. Perhaps the complex served as a kind of observatory, with each symbol oriented toward a specific star. But the Hentaway stone signs are more than just symbols on the surface of the slabs. Narrow corridors with cuts at uniform heights were discovered underground. Some researchers believe these corridors may have been text tunnels, places where ritual inscriptions were placed along the passages so that priests could read them aloud as they moved deeper. Strangely, however, the inscriptions resemble geometric symbols rather than words. This suggests a ritualistic purpose for the signs, perhaps connected to meditative practices or visual stylizations of the cosmos. It is theorized that the Hentaway signs are remnants of an ancient knowledge transmission system that predates classical hieroglyphs. Some symbols resemble early forms of signs found at Nekhen and Abydos. However, the Hentaway style is much more graphic and abstract. It is not an attempt to depict an object, but rather to express an idea, movement, or cycle. This symbolism is closer to cosmological schemes than literary writing. Of particular interest are stones with circles divided into sectors. These circles may be early forms of diagrams reflecting the division of time or space. One such stone displays 4 sectors, oriented strictly according to the cardinal directions. The center of the circle has a depression, possibly intended for the insertion of a metal pin or wooden pointer. This has led some researchers to speculate that a device similar to a sundial or a primitive compass existed at Hentaway. However, there are also more mystical versions. For example, locals claimed that the stone markings were associated with desert spirits who supposedly came at night. These legends may have been based on the fact that many of the markings are aligned with the rising star of Sirius, the star of the goddess Isis. In Egypt, Sirius was a symbol of rebirth. Perhaps the markings were part of a ritual designed to anticipate her appearance. In some cultures, markings on stones were used to record mythological events, and Hentaway may have been such a sanctuary. No less interesting is the arrangement of the signs. Most of them point toward ancient Memphis, not the necropolis. This is unusual as burial complexes are usually oriented west, the direction of death. Hentaway, however, faces east toward sunrise. This may indicate that the signs served not funerary symbolism, but something else, perhaps a connection to life cycles, light, and the seasons. The easterly orientation also supports the astronomical hypothesis. In one of the most isolated areas of Hentaway, two enormous slabs were discovered, set vertically to form a narrow passage. Deep incisions, almost runic symbols resembling a combination of vertical and diagonal lines, are visible on the inner surface of these slabs. Over a distance of several steps, the symbols form a rhythm reminiscent of ancient chants. It's possible the passage was used in initiation rituals, where the stone symbols themselves served as magical formulas, and a priest interpreted them aloud. Hentaway is also associated with an unusual find, small stone tokens carved in the same shapes as the slabs. These tokens could have been part of ritual sets. Their weight is uniform, indicating standardization. They may have been used in priestly initiation games or as a teaching tool. But the strangest thing is that many of the tokens are made of a stone not found in the Memphis region. This suggests that the complex had connections with other regions. It is hypothesized that the Hentaway signs represent an early form of memory maps, schematic systems that helped priests memorize astronomical events, rituals, and sequences of actions. Each sign could have symbolized a specific stage of a ritual. The slabs may have been used as altars of knowledge, where priests demonstrated the structure of the world to their students. But what's most intriguing is that some of the symbols glow in certain light. When the rays of the morning sun hit the stone surface at an angle, the fine lines become brighter, while the surrounding stone darkens. This creates the effect of activating the symbol. Perhaps the ancient craftsmen used the stone's properties to enhance the ritual effect. This technique is rarely found in other Egyptian monuments. The Hentaway stone signs remain a mystery, connecting several layers of ancient knowledge. They are symbols, landmarks, and tools. Their enigmatic graphics challenge traditional understandings of the development of writing. They could have been part of ritual practice or an early scientific system. But regardless of the interpretation, Hentaway remains a place where the ancient Egyptians recorded their connection to the stars, time, and the forces of nature. Ritual Circle of the Titi Necropolis. The Titi Necropolis, located north of Saqqara, is known primarily for its 6th dynasty pyramid and underground corridors covered in magical texts. However, a mysterious structure located near the pyramid complex, the so-called Ritual Circle, remains far less studied. This stone ring consists of massive blocks arranged in a perfectly circular formation. Its origin is not indicated in any ancient written source, and its purpose is the subject of heated debate among Egyptologists, mystics, and scholars of ancient architecture. The Ritual Circle was discovered by chance in the early 20th century when archaeologists were clearing a layer of sand around burial complexes. Initially, the structure was assumed to be the foundation of a ruined temple or the outer wall of an ancient sanctuary. However, careful examination revealed that it does not match the style or proportions of Titi-era structures. The blocks that make up the circle fit together perfectly, and the joints between them are so thin that in some places they are almost invisible. The circle's orientation is particularly noteworthy. If one draws lines between 4 equally spaced points around its circumference, they point to sunrise on the equinoxes and sunset on the solstices. This precision suggests that the circle was used as an astronomical instrument. It's possible that the priests of Titi observed the movements of the stars here to adjust their ritual calendar. But no less mysterious are the symbols carved on the inside of the stones. They are short vertical lines, sometimes intersecting at an angle. Some researchers believe they are an early form of ritual symbols, possibly associated with the gods of the sky and time. However, there is a more intriguing hypothesis. The lines may be traces of wooden structures inserted inside the circle. If so, the circle was not simply a stone platform, but part of a complex ritual mechanism. An important detail is the small circular depressions located around the inner perimeter. They are spaced at regular intervals and have the same depth. Their purpose is unknown. Some believe they housed lamps, others that they served as mounting points for wooden posts. However, another theory suggests that the depressions were used to create sound effects. When the edge of the stone is struck, the sound resonates, amplifying within the circle. It is possible that the circle was used as a sound amphora, an instrument that creates a special atmosphere during rituals. Some researchers have noted that the circle is located where the underground corridors of the Titi Pyramid intersect with natural caverns. This may indicate a connection between the circle and subterranean structures. It's possible that rituals associated with the soul's transition to the afterlife were performed through it. Ritual circles are often found in cultures around the world as symbols of portals opening the way from one level of existence to another. The Titi circle may have played a similar role. An engineering study revealed that the stones of the circle bear traces of a grinding process executed with extraordinary precision. Their surface is slightly tilted inward, creating the visual effect of a downward gaze. This could have been part of a ritual requiring focusing attention on the center of the circle. Incidentally, no objects were found in the center, but a layer of dense limestone, worked differently than the stones around the periphery, was discovered there. It's possible that a wooden object, no longer preserved, stood in the center of the circle. It is believed that the circle was the site of coronations. In some cultures, the circle symbolizes power, infinity, and a connection with the gods. It is possible that Titi or his successors underwent their accession rites here. This is supported by reliefs found near the circle, which depict scenes of the transfer of the scepter of power. However, it is currently impossible to directly link these images to the circle. No inscriptions have been found near it. But even more intriguing is the hypothesis that the circle was used as a site for nocturnal rituals. At certain moon positions, the shadows from the nearby necropolis walls fall directly onto the center of the circle. If priests performed rituals on such nights, the combination of shadow, light, and sound could have created a mystical atmosphere. Ancient texts often mention places of night vision, where priests communicated with the gods. Perhaps the circle is one such place. Also of interest are the underground sensors installed in the 21st century to study the structure beneath the circle. They revealed a system of voids beneath the surface, forming the shape of a five-pointed star. This could have been a natural formation, but the shape is too regular. Some believe the voids are connected to a drainage system, while others believe they were a site for underground rituals. If so, the circle could have served as the upper portion of an underground sanctuary. Archaeologists also discovered several stone tables with deep cutouts near the circle. The cutouts resemble symbols of water or waves. It's possible that purification rituals involving water were performed here. Such rituals are important in Egyptian religion, where purification is a key part of entering the underworld. If the circle was associated with water rituals, it could have served as a place to prepare the deceased for their transition. But the most enigmatic discovery concerns reliefs depicting people standing in a circle with their arms raised. This is a very rare motif for the Titi period. Typically, reliefs depict scenes of offerings, hunting, or farming. This one depicts an action reminiscent of a collective ritual. Perhaps the circle was a place of worship for the sky gods, where priests and ritual participants formed a living circle around a stone structure. There is also a mathematical hypothesis that the circle expresses certain proportions related to the Egyptian measurement system. The diameter of the circle is divided into parts, each corresponding to ancient units of length. Such proportions could have been used in the construction of other structures in the necropolis. In this case, the circle served as a kind of standard, a stone measure by which calculations were made. The ritual circle of the Titi necropolis remains one of the least studied and yet most intriguing structures of Saqqara. Its perfect shape, orientation, hidden voids, strange markings, and acoustic properties indicate that the circle was more than just an architectural form, but a crucial element of a religious system. It may have combined the functions of an astronomical instrument, a portal to the spirit world, a place of initiation, and a center of ritual practice. Today, the circle is partially covered with sand, and its true boundaries are barely discernible. However, modern research continues, and each new discovery brings us closer to understanding how the ancient Egyptians perceived the connection between earth, sky, and the afterlife. The circle was likely a symbol of this connection, a stone reflection of the cosmic order that was intended to accompany King Titi on his eternal journey. Underground niches of Saqqara North. The northern part of Saqqara, once home to priestly workshops, service courtyards, and auxiliary sanctuaries, contains one of the most enigmatic structures of the Old Kingdom, a system of subterranean niches extending deep beneath the plateau's surface. These niches, found beneath layers of sand and ruined buildings, are not mentioned in any ancient text. Their purpose remains unclear. They are too small for burials, too neat to be random depressions, and too numerous to be a simple architectural feature. The first underground niches were discovered by chance in the mid-20th century, when archaeologists cleared the foundations of a small temple associated with the priesthood of the 6th dynasty. Beneath the temple's foundations was a narrow passage leading to a long hall. The walls of the hall were covered with rows of rectangular recesses, uniform in shape, horizontally aligned, and arranged in tiers. Initially, researchers assumed the niches were used to store wooden figurines or vessels. However, none of them showed signs of use. What was particularly astonishing was that the niches extended far beyond the hall. Narrow, steeply sloping corridors led to new chambers. There, the niches were no longer arranged in rows, but in a spiral, forming a whimsical pattern on the walls. It appears that the builders deliberately created geometric forms based on principles of symmetry and repetition. Perhaps they reflected the structure of the cosmic order that the priests sought to capture in stone. Some niches had strange grooves, thin vertical furrows extending several centimeters deep. Touching these grooves produced an unusual effect. Sound spread through the stone and amplified, as if the stone wall itself were responding to the touch. This acoustic property was unlikely to be accidental. Perhaps the niches acted as resonators. In ancient rituals, sound was used to communicate with the gods. If the niches amplified the voice or certain frequencies, they could have been part of the ritual. But no less mysterious is the ventilation system discovered in the corridors. Narrow openings in the ceiling, barely visible to the naked eye, connected various niches. When archaeologists turned on the ventilation units in the corridor, air rustled through the hidden channels, creating a low, vibrating sound. Some researchers speculate that these pipes were used to conduct aromatic smoke used in purification rituals. In this case, the niches could have been symbolic receptacles through which spirits, purified by the smoke, passed. An interesting feature of the underground niches is their orientation to the stars. Several corridors point due north toward the region of ever-present stars, the stars of eternity, which the ancient Egyptians associated with immortality. This coincidence has led some scholars to speculate that the niches may have served as a star map. Their arrangement mimics the patterns of the stars, albeit in an abstract form. If so, the underground complex could have been a kind of ritual observatory, but without access to the open sky. It is hypothesized that the niches were used in revitalization ceremonies. Some texts describe a ritual in which a priest touched a statue or object in specific places. imbuing it with life force. Perhaps the niches represented multiple contact points where priests performed sequential ritual actions, creating the sensation of energy flowing along the walls. If so, the underground corridors were sites of hidden rituals performed only by the highest clergy. However, a discovery made in one of the most remote corridors was a true mystery. A niche was discovered there, unlike all the others. It was deeper, and its interior surface was polished to a mirror shine. The faint light from the torches was multiplied by the reflection of the stone, creating the illusion of depth. At the bottom of the niche, the archaeologists noticed a thin line resembling a horizon. This design suggests a symbolic representation of the horizon, a sacred place where the sun entered and left the world each day. Equally mysterious is the fact that the niches are found at different levels, with some located very low, almost to the floor. What were such low niches for? One theory holds that they were intended for figurines of the lower gods, deities of the earth and the underworld. Another theory suggests that the low niches were used by priests when performing rituals while lying or sitting. But there's also a third hypothesis, that the low niches symbolized the underworld, while the high ones symbolized the heavenly realms. In one of the niches, archaeologists found a small stone sphere. It was perfectly round and had a smooth surface. At first glance, it appears to be an ordinary object, but its material, a rare limestone with bluish veins, is not found in Saqqara. Perhaps the sphere was brought from afar and had ritual significance. One researcher has advanced a bold hypothesis. The sphere symbolized the sun, which passes through the niches, similar to how light passes through the gates of heaven. If true, the niches could have been part of a complex cosmological model. The passages between the halls play a significant role in the complex. They are so narrow that it is difficult for a person to navigate them. These passages may have symbolized the difficulties that the priest must overcome on his spiritual journey. Some passages are triangular in shape, a rare feature in Egyptian architecture. The triangle was associated with Mount Ben, the sacred primordial hill, a symbol of the beginning of the world. Thus, the passages may have symbolized the path from chaos to cosmic order. The most intriguing discovery of recent years was the discovery of a hidden chamber located behind a series of niches. It is small and almost empty, but traces of blue paint remain on its walls. In ancient Egypt, blue was associated with the sky and water, the two elements that determined life and death. Perhaps the chamber was a place where priests performed secret rituals addressed to the sky gods, or it was a preparatory chamber, where purification rites were performed before the main ritual in the niches. Despite decades of research, the underground niches of Saqqara North remain a mystery. They are a complex that combines acoustic effects, astronomical orientation, symbolic forms, and a complex corridor structure. All of this suggests that the niches were more than just a decorative element. They were a crucial component of a religious system, possibly a system for transmitting secret knowledge accessible only to a select few. The underground niches of Saqqara North reveal that even during the Old Kingdom, a level of spiritual practice existed that modern researchers can only guess at. Their study continues, and new structures will likely be discovered in the future that will help decipher the meaning of this stone labyrinth. Stone chambers of Judjatif. On the eastern edge of the Saqqara Plateau, near ancient workshops associated with the late Old Kingdom, archaeologists have discovered a mysterious complex of rooms dubbed the Stone Chambers of Judjatif. The name is provisional. Ancient texts contain no hint of such a complex, much less a figure to whom it might refer. However, the unusual architecture, the combination of carefully crafted surfaces, and strange incisions on the walls make this structure one of the most intriguing mysteries of the late 6th dynasty. The first explorations began after workers stumbled upon a flat slab buried in the sand. The slab turned out to be the entrance to an artificial shaft. The shaft led to a large rectangular hall, the walls of which were covered with a fine grid of lines. These lines are arranged with such precision that they create the impression of a geometric drawing. But most importantly, the lines do not form words or symbols of known scripts. They resemble a graphic diagram, perhaps related to the orientation of the building or a ritual representation of space. The hall itself has an unusual shape. Its walls slope slightly inward, giving the room a pyramidal character. The ceiling forms a complex stepped vault, reflecting sound and creating a multiple echo effect. If a word is spoken in the center of the hall, it returns as a faint vibration from each step. This acoustic phenomenon has impressed researchers. The ancient builders clearly aimed to achieve a specific sound. It is possible that the hall was used for rituals involving the voice, prayers, or sound formulas. Further excavations revealed 4 more chambers behind the main hall. They are connected by a common axis oriented toward the winter solstice. A narrow beam of light, passing through an opening in the surface, is directed toward this point. On a certain day of the year, the beam penetrates and illuminates the central stone in one of the chambers. This discovery suggested that the Judgeatif chambers were part of a solar cult, but in an unusual hidden form, without obelisks, without open courtyards, without the elements characteristic of solar temples of the 5th and 6th dynasties. However, the second room raises the most questions. Its walls are lined with smooth, shallow recesses. They are arranged at varying heights, like steps that allow one to read the space. Some recesses are rounded, others rectangular. Researchers have attempted to associate them with storage functions, but the dimensions of the niches do not correspond to any typical objects. Another hypothesis suggests that the niches served to house stone tablets, perhaps temporarily inserted during rituals. However, no traces of the tablets have been found. The most astonishing discovery was made in the third room. A long stone table covered in fine incisions was discovered there. The incisions form spiral structures that appear to represent movement. This may be a symbolic representation of time, similar to the Maidum calendar. However, unlike those spirals, the lines here are not horizontal, but vertical, as if depicting a descending flow. This suggests rituals associated with immersion or transition to another level of being. Equally mysterious are the pigment traces found in the floor recesses. The pigments are red and blue, traditional Egyptian colors symbolizing fire and water, life and the sky. Perhaps the floor served as a ritual map of the world, with the red zones symbolizing the earth and the blue zones the heavenly waters. If so, the chambers could have been a place where priests were taught the basics of cosmogony. But again, the lack of inscriptions makes any interpretation hypothetical. Beneath the main hall, researchers discovered another chamber, accessible through a narrow, creeping corridor. This chamber is carved from solid limestone, and its walls are perfectly smooth. On one wall, a thin line is visible, rising upward and disappearing into the stone. Some believe this is a symbol, perhaps indicating the direction of force. Others see it as a tool mark, indicating an unfinished work. But what's strange is that the line is perfectly smooth, making it difficult to explain away as a random impact. The interior of the chambers suggests different states of light. In some places, the walls are covered with a thin layer of polished plaster. In the light of torches, this plaster reflects a warm hue, creating a sense of movement on the surface. Priests may have used such effects to create a mystical atmosphere during rituals. In other places, the walls are matte, absorbing light well. This alternation of light and dark areas may indicate a ritual transition between two worlds, the world of light and the world of shadow. There is also evidence that the chambers were used for initiation rituals. Some archaeologists believe that only trained priests passed through the narrow corridors. In one of the rooms, handprints were found on the walls, imprints that were not left by chance. They are located at the same height, suggesting a ritual gesture. Perhaps the priests touched the walls to awaken the space, or perhaps they were leaving symbolic traces for future generations. Further interest was aroused by the unusual shape of one of the vaults. It resembles an inverted pyramid. This is a rare architectural element that could have symbolic significance. In Egyptian cosmology, inverted shapes were often associated with the underworld and hidden knowledge. If the vault truly symbolizes a subterranean pyramid, then the Jajatif chambers could have been a place where rituals related to the subterranean journey of the soul were performed. Later studies revealed hidden cavities in the walls. Ground-penetrating radar revealed regularly shaped voids behind the stone slabs. These may be hidden chambers intended for storing ritual objects. However, they are so tightly sealed that opening them would require the destruction of the structure. Therefore, the contents of these chambers remain unknown. An interesting observation was made regarding the surface of some stones. They bear traces of microscopic cuts, executed with incredible precision. Such cuts could have served as markers for the craftsmen who created complex geometric structures. It's possible that the Jajatif chambers were a design laboratory for priest architects, where they developed plans for future temples and sanctuaries. But again, this is only one hypothesis. Despite the many interpretations, the main point remains unchanged. The Jajatif chambers were part of a hidden world of sacred architecture. They are not a temple, not a tomb, not a workshop. They are a space created for working with knowledge, a secret, profound knowledge that connects the material world with the world of ideas. The stone chambers seem imbued with a silence in which the echo of ancient voices can be heard. Today, the chambers remain closed to the public, and research continues. Perhaps future discoveries will help us understand the role this complex played in the spiritual life of the final period of the Old Kingdom. But it is already clear. Jajatif is one of those places where the ancient Egyptians combined architecture, science, and mysticism into a single system. Rock corridors of Dashur. Dashur, famous for its two great pyramids of Snefru, the Bent and the Red, has long been a symbol of the architectural experiments of the Fourth Dynasty. However, only in recent decades have archaeologists begun to realize that beneath these monuments lies another, no less mysterious, part of the complex. A system of rock corridors extending deep beneath the plateau's surface. These corridors are not mentioned in ancient texts, are not directly associated with pyramid burials, and possess architectural features that defy the conventional logic of Old Kingdom construction. The discovery of the underground system began with the exploration of a false entrance to the Red Pyramid. Workers noticed a slight sinkhole in the ground a few dozen meters from its northern entrance. The sinkhole led to a small crack in the rock, revealing a narrow, sloping passage. Initially, it was thought to be a natural crack caused by an ancient earthquake, but as they delved deeper into the passage, the researchers discovered perfectly carved walls. The crack turned out to be the entrance to an artificially created corridor, hidden from view for over 4,000 years. The first few meters of the corridor were remarkably smooth, as if carved with a single stroke of a gigantic tool. The passage was barely wide enough for one person to pass sideways. The walls bore traces of thin horizontal lines, evenly spaced, as if marking stages of work. The corridor gradually widened, leading the explorers into a vaulted chamber reminiscent of the interior of pyramids, but executed in a crude, rock-cut style. The walls of the chamber bore the imprints of a tool different from those used in the construction of the pyramid chambers. Several rounded depressions were found on the floor of the hall. They were too perfect to be accidental, but too shallow to hold vessels. Some researchers have suggested that the depressions were used to install wooden stands or lamps. Others believe they were anchor points for some kind of devices, possibly measuring or ritual ones. However, the lack of any inscriptions leaves these ideas as mere hypotheses. Two corridors branched off from the original hall. The first led downward at a sharp angle. The second led toward the bent pyramid. This direction immediately aroused interest. The builders clearly sought to connect the underground corridors with both pyramids, as if creating a single complex linking the above-ground and underground elements. This idea corresponds to the concept of a double world where every above-ground symbol has an underground reflector, part of an invisible sacred space. The corridor leading to the bent pyramid turned out to be the strangest. It had a jagged shape, echoing the pyramid's external profile. This jaggedness could be explained by the terrain, but it is too precise to be accidental. Perhaps it symbolized the path of the solar barge passing between two worlds. The bent pyramid has always been considered a transitional form, and the corridor could reflect this transition in architectural symbolism. Along the way to the bent pyramid, the corridor opened into irregularly shaped pocket chambers. In one of these chambers, researchers found traces of pigments, red, ochre, and black. These colors were often used in funerary and ritual symbolism. However, not a single figure or inscription survived. Perhaps the walls were once decorated with images applied with organic dyes that did not stand the test of time. Another corridor leading downwards proved to be smoother and deeper. Its walls were covered with numerous vertical cuts. Some believe these are the marks of tools used to shape the rock. However, the cuts are too evenly spaced. They resemble a form of archaic writing, similar to those found in the early sanctuaries of Abydos. If these were indeed symbols, then the underground corridors of Dashur could have served as a place for secret rituals or teaching. However, the meaning of these signs has been lost. A deep corridor opened into a huge chamber, partially filled with rubble. Its ceiling was decorated with natural veining of the stone, reminiscent of patterns of light. A perfectly leveled round pedestal, made of a single stone, was discovered a meter above the floor. Such a pedestal could have been used as an altar or a platform for ritual objects. However, there were no artifacts around the pedestal, which is unusual for ritual sites. Perhaps objects were brought here and then, later removed. The most astonishing thing was something else: the chamber's acoustics. Any sound uttered in the center was transformed into a long, booming echo. This distinguishes the chamber from the chambers in Sneferu's pyramids, where the acoustics are more subdued. Some researchers believe the chamber was used for rituals involving the voice. Perhaps priests cast spells that were meant to be reflected in the stone. In ancient Egyptian magic, the voice was a tool capable of influencing the spirit world. During exploration of the lower levels, several narrow cracks were discovered, leading to deeper cavities. However, penetrating these is dangerous. The rock is too susceptible to collapse. Instrumental studies show that irregularly shaped voids lie beneath the corridors. These may be traces of ancient stone quarries, but the shape of the voids is too geometric. It is believed that some of the corridors were built on old mining shafts, which were later repurposed as sanctuaries. However, the most intriguing discovery was that the corridors of Dashur are oriented according to the movements of certain stars. Analysis revealed that the main axis of the complex coincides with the direction of the star Sirius, a key star for the ancient Egyptians. At the moment of its heliacal rising, the corridors are filled with a special light, which is reflected in the quartz veins of the rock. This suggests that the corridors serve not only as architectural passages, but also as instruments for observing celestial phenomena. Some modern researchers propose a more radical theory. The corridor complex may have been part of the priest's ritual path associated with initiations. Trials could have taken place along the corridors. The darkness, narrow passages, and sharp descents and ascents created an atmosphere of danger and mystical transition. The priest had to overcome these obstacles to be born again, a symbolic reflection of the sun's path through the underworld. However, the greatest mystery is the absence of inscriptions. The Fourth Dynasty period is characterized by a paucity of texts, but not their complete absence. Perhaps the complex was created for rituals, the knowledge of which was transmitted only orally. Or the corridors were built during an era when writing was of limited use. The absence of inscriptions makes the corridors seem like a pure space, created solely for experience, mystical, auditory, astronomical. Today, the rock corridors of Dashur remain one of the most poorly studied structures in Egypt. Many of them are still hidden beneath a thick layer of sand, and their exploration continues slowly and carefully. But it is already clear, this complex was not a random piece of architecture. It was created intentionally, with a deep understanding of relief, light, sound, and symbolism. The rock corridors of Dashur are a path leading into the depths of an ancient worldview, where stone and stars coexisted in a single sacred geometry. Secret tombs of the early nomarchs. Early nomarchs, rulers of local regions in Egypt, played a key role in the formation of the state. They administered land, distributed resources, oversaw irrigation, and maintained communication between the royal power and the people. But despite their importance, their tombs remain one of the most poorly understood mysteries of the Old Kingdom. Their burials are hidden, fragmentary, and many remain undiscovered. Archaeologists have discovered only traces of large necropolises, which point to something far more complex than the simple tombs of regional leaders. The first thing that surprised the researchers was the geography of the burials. Unlike the kings, the nomarchs did not build their tombs near the main pyramids. Their necropolises were located on the outskirts of the plateau, in areas where the rock has a complex structure and the ground is full of natural faults. This location suggests a connection between the natural features of the area and ritual beliefs. Perhaps the nomarchs believed that their spirits were to follow natural underground paths rather than artificial corridors like those of the kings. The most interesting discoveries were made in the necropolises of Saqqara, Beni Hassan, and Jebel el-Silsila. It was there that burial complexes were discovered that included long horizontal corridors leading to a network of rock-cut chambers. These corridors have a strange feature. They frequently change height and width, as if the builders were following an invisible pattern. Some researchers believe these changes symbolize the soul's journey through different levels of the underworld, each with its own function. A hall with columns carved directly from the rock was discovered in one of the tombs. The columns are crudely formed, but in the light of torches, they cast shadows resembling the silhouettes of standing people. This led to the hypothesis that the hall was used for rituals of communication with ancestors. The ancient Egyptians believed that the spirits of the dead were present among the living during special ceremonies. Perhaps the columns symbolize the ancestors themselves, standing alongside their descendants. Some tombs contain complex ventilation systems, unusual for burials of regional rulers. The ventilation shafts are aligned with specific stars, such as Meskhetiu, a constellation associated with the god Osiris. This orientation suggests that the tombs were used not only for burials, but also for rituals associated with rebirth and eternal life. It's possible that ceremonies were held in them that invoked the light of the stars to purify the soul of the deceased. An even more intriguing discovery was made in one of the tombs at Saqqara. A drawing made with red pigment was discovered on the floor of a small chamber. The drawing is a circle with radial lines, reminiscent of a time chart or calendar. However, the circle has 12 lines, an unusual number that doesn't correspond to Egyptian hours or months. Some researchers suggest this is an early form of a symbolic map of the territories ruled by the nomarch. In this case, the circle symbolized his authority, which continued even after death. The tombs of nomarchs often contain secret chambers separated from the main complex. They have no entrances and can only be accessed through narrow cracks in the walls. Such chambers may have served as repositories for ritual objects, treasures, or magical texts. However, a more mystical theory holds that these chambers were places of silence, where the nomarch's spirit would reside before passing on to the next world. The walls of some of these chambers are covered with a thin layer of whitish paint which reflects light, creating a soft glow. The phenomenon of double corridors is particularly noteworthy. Some tombs have two parallel passages leading to the same chamber. One is wide and comfortable, the other narrow and low. Perhaps the wide corridor was intended for processions and rituals, while the narrow one was for the symbolic journeys of the soul. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul undergoes trials before reaching the final judgment. The narrow corridor could symbolize these trials. Some rock-cut chambers contain traces of water. Mineralized streaks are visible on the walls, which only form with prolonged exposure to moisture. This is surprising given Egypt's dry climate. Perhaps water was used in purification rituals. Alternatively, the nomarchs' tombs were located in areas where groundwater emerged close to the surface. In Egyptian mythology, water is associated with the primordial ocean from which the world emerged. Therefore, the presence of water in the tombs could symbolize a return to origins. One of the most bizarre elements of the tombs is the last-way stone. This is a flat slab installed at the end of the corridor leading to the burial chamber. The slab is always rounded and tilted slightly forward. Some researchers believe it symbolized the gateway to the other world. In some tombs, traces of touching were preserved on the slab, fingerprints made with red pigment. Such touching may have been part of a ritual in which participants asked the deceased for protection. Some modern archaeologists believe that the tombs of the early nomarchs were far more important than previously thought. They may have served as training centers for priests, as a means of replicating the underworld, and as venues for initiation rites. Many corridors are decorated with geometric symbols reminiscent of the movements of the sun and stars. This indicates profound astronomical knowledge, which may have been imparted to students here. But the greatest mystery remains the tombs that have yet to be found. Ancient texts mention nomarchs, whose burials are supposed to be located in areas that are now completely hidden under sand or destroyed by time. Some researchers believe that the most important tombs, those containing secret archives of local government, are still awaiting discovery. Perhaps they contain texts that will explain how exactly the nomarchs governed their regions and what secret knowledge they preserved. Today, the tombs of the early nomarchs remain one of the most poorly studied layers of Egyptian history. They offer insights into how local government functioned, what rituals accompanied the lives of regional rulers, and what secret knowledge was stored in the depths of their underworlds. But most importantly, they demonstrate that even regional leaders of the Old Kingdom created complex, well-thought-out architectural systems that reflected their worldview and aspirations for eternity. The Old Kingdom reveals itself not only as the time of the Great Pyramids, but also as a hidden world of underground passages, tombs, secret vaults, and ritual spaces. Each structure, from the chambers of Medum to the corridors of Dashur, bears traces of an ancient thought connecting earth and sky. By exploring these stone worlds, we come closer to understanding how the ancient priests envisioned the path to eternity.